It was back in 2017. I'd set out on a solo road trip to a stretch of forest a few hours from where I lived. There was this long abandoned ranger lookout I'd been eager to check out for months. Technically, going inside or staying overnight wasn't allowed. It hadn't been maintained and was labeled as potentially unsafe. Still, I'd done a bit of digging online beforehand. The most recent mention I found was from 2014, and folks said it was still standing, maybe a little run down, but not dangerous. That was all I had to go on. I eventually found a narrow pull-off along a quiet dirt road and parked there. After throwing on my backpack, packed with enough supplies for 2 nights, I started the trek. These kinds of trips don't come with marked trails, so I relied on a handheld satellite GPS to keep me oriented. But for the most part, I was just weaving through untracked wilderness, figuring it out step by step. The hike took somewhere between 4 and 5 hours. The deeper I went, the more tangled and uneven the ground became. My plan was to sleep inside the tower if it was safe enough. If it wasn't, I figured I'd just pitch my tent nearby and make do. By the time I caught a glimpse of the structure rising just above the tree line, I was exhausted. But when I finally reached it, the place actually looked better than I expected. The paint was long gone, weathered down to bare wood, but the frame itself still looked sturdy. I pressed against a few of the main supports to test them out, and they didn't budge. Feeling hopeful, I climbed up the old ladder to see if I could make it work for the night. The ladder was made of metal and felt secure enough, but every step echoed with a low groan. When I reached the top platform, I had to pause. It took my breath away. From up there, the view stretched out in every direction, just trees, no roads, no rooftops, nothing man-made as far as I could see, just pure wilderness. After soaking in the landscape, I stepped around the platform and into the lookout itself. It was smaller than I'd expected. Definitely not one of those oversized towers that get turned into trendy rentals. This was one small room, maybe 140 or 150 square feet. In one corner, there was a sagging old cot with the stuffing coming out. Opposite that, a rotted desk sat beneath a wall of broken windows that spanned nearly the whole side. There wasn't much else. I set my pack down, unrolled my mat and sleeping bag, and warmed up a meal using my little camp stove. As the sun began to dip, I stepped back out onto the ledge. The view was incredible, one of the best I'd ever witnessed. But the light faded fast, and soon I was surrounded by complete darkness. Thick cloud cover meant no stars, no moon, just black. With nothing pressing to do, I stayed where I was, sitting on the edge, just listening. About an hour after nightfall, something caught my eye. A glow down among the trees. At first, I thought it was a flashlight, but the color was off, more orange than white, and it flickered strangely. The way it danced made it look more like a flame, like someone was carrying a torch through the forest. It moved slowly between the trunks not far from where I'd hiked in. The whole thing didn't sit right with me. This area was far too remote for someone else to just happen to be here. And who wanders around dense woods at night with a literal flame in hand instead of a flashlight? I watched the orange glow shift through the trees for a while, then it disappeared behind something and never re-emerged. I waited another half hour, but there was no sign of it again. Still, I stayed out on the platform, just appreciating how still and quiet the night had become. Eventually, a breeze picked up, and the chill nudged me to start heading inside. I stood to take in one last look at the view before calling it a night. But when I glanced down over the edge, someone was there. Right below me, in the clearing between the tower and the forest, stood a figure. They weren't moving, just standing completely still and looking straight up at me. It might have been the same person I'd seen earlier, the one carrying that strange light. "Hey," I called out, not really sure what else to say. They didn't answer. We just stared at each other for maybe 10-15 seconds. Then, slowly, they raised a hand, not waving, not signaling, just lifting it slightly. It almost looked like a quiet gesture, like acknowledgement or maybe an apology. And then they turned and walked calmly back into the forest. No flashlight, no torch, no sound. It was undeniably unsettling, but somehow in that moment I convinced myself it was just another backpacker hoping to use the lookout for the night. Maybe they'd spotted me and were deciding whether to keep searching or not. That would explain the hesitation, the silent wave, and their retreat. At least, that's what I told myself. I stayed out for a bit longer, watching the trees for any sign of movement. When nothing else happened, I finally went inside, crawled into my sleeping bag, and tried to get warm. It wasn't easy falling asleep. Between the wind rattling the old window panes and the creaks of the wooden frame beneath me, I kept shifting around. But eventually, I must have drifted off. I don't know how much time had passed when I woke up again, but the wind had died down and everything outside was still pitch black. I blinked a few times, trying to figure out what had pulled me out of sleep. Then I heard it. That familiar sound, the quiet groan of the metal ladder. I sat up, frozen, hoping I was imagining it. But then it came again, and again. Someone was climbing up. I couldn't see how far they'd made it, but I could clearly hear each step groaning just beneath the upper ledge, just outside the darkened windows. I unzipped my sleeping bag and got to my feet, my pulse pounding as I grabbed my pack and stepped out onto the platform. In the 20 seconds or so it took me to move, the creaking outside grew louder and quicker. Whoever was on that ladder was speeding up. Then, just as I made it onto the ledge, everything went silent. I stood still, listening. After a few seconds, I slowly made my way around the perimeter, toward the part of the platform where the ladder reached the top. I paused before turning the corner, then cautiously leaned forward to check. There was no one there. I stepped a little closer, heart thudding, and peered down over the edge. The ladder was empty, no sign of movement at all. I just stood there, frozen, trying to make sense of it. The sound had been real. I hadn't imagined it, so where had they gone? That's when I heard footsteps, fast and heavy, coming from the opposite end of the walkway behind me. I spun around just in time to see a dark shape dart between the windows across the lookout's far side. I didn't stop to think. I dropped onto the ladder and started climbing down as fast as I could. Every rung felt slick under my hands, and my legs were shaking so badly I nearly slipped more than once. I didn't look up until I was halfway down, when I saw the top of their head lean over the edge above me. I didn't wait, I just kept going, rung after rung, until I hit the ground and bolted into the trees. Looking back, I honestly don't know why I instinctively grabbed my pack when I first got up, but I'm beyond glad I did. My flashlight and GPS were inside, and without them, I doubt I would have made it out. I kept moving, following my route back through the forest until I reached the spot where I'd parked. I never saw or heard anything behind me during that hike out. Once I got to my car, I started the engine, pulled onto the road, and didn't stop driving until I was long gone. I never went back. I had gone out for a quiet weekend by a small lake I used to visit growing up. Honestly, the plan wasn't anything special, just a couple days in the woods to unwind. No schedule, no expectations. The first day was exactly what I needed. I reached the lake, pitched my tent, and spent the whole day just relaxing. The spot was pretty remote. There was a faint trail leading in, but it wasn't marked on any official maps. The kind of place only people from around the area would even know existed. My dad used to bring me here when I was younger. And through all the years, whether I came with him as a kid or alone as an adult, I had never run into another person at that lake. Not once. No campers, no fires, no trash. It always felt untouched. On the second day, I ended up spending a lot of time just walking along the edge of the water. Thinking, mostly. I must have looped around the lake 3 or 4 times. For most of that time, it was peaceful, just the sound of water and birds, but during one of my final laps, something caught my eye that made me stop cold. Footprints. They were right at the edge of the trees where the dirt met the grass. Clear, fresh impressions that hadn't been there earlier. I was sure of it. I had passed that exact stretch multiple times that day. They definitely hadn't been there before. But that wasn't even the strangest part. They weren't boot prints or shoes, they were bare feet. No socks, no tread, just the outline of someone's toes and heels pressed into the soil. That alone was odd, but what really made it worse was that the part of the lake where I found them wasn't even an easy access point. It wasn't a spot where someone might sit and dip their feet in. The water was murky there, and the slope was too steep to wade in comfortably. I hadn't seen or heard anyone all day, not swimming, not walking, nothing. So who was out there barefoot, and why hadn't I noticed them? I couldn't shake the thought, had someone been watching me that whole time, just staying out of sight? It was hard not to let my imagination run wild. From what I could tell, the tracks led right up to the edge of the trees with a clear view of the lake, then turned and headed straight back into the woods, disappearing into the deeper brush. I wasn't about to chase them down or wander off trail, so I just made my way back to camp. Still, I kept glancing around, toward the water, toward the tree line, half expecting to catch a glimpse of someone standing there. But the forest stayed quiet. As the sun started to dip below the trees, the uneasiness crept in again. The footprints hadn't just been odd, they felt deliberate, and whoever made them probably hadn't gone far. When it got dark, I stoked the fire and made sure I had plenty of wood to keep it burning. I sat close, trying to distract myself, but my thoughts kept circling back. Part of me tried to write it off, to tell myself I was reading too much into it. But another part, the quieter, sharper part, felt like my instincts were right. Something wasn't sitting right. Then I heard it, footsteps. They were slow, deliberate, coming from the trees behind me. I stood immediately and turned toward the sound, eyes fixed on the dark. It wasn't just one person either. I could hear two sets of footsteps, side by side, moving closer, and then they appeared, a man and a woman, walking together, stepped just into the edge of the firelight. They stopped there, right at the boundary where the light faded into shadow. I couldn't make out their faces, just their outlines. They didn't speak. They didn't move. I called out, "Is everything okay?" The woman turned without a word and ran, straight back into the forest. No hesitation, no glance back. But the man stayed where he was. He didn't follow her. He didn't answer me. He didn't move at all. That's when I noticed. He wasn't wearing shoes, just like the prints I'd seen earlier along the lake. I asked him again if he needed something, but he didn't respond. He simply turned around and walked away, disappearing into the trees without a sound. The second he was out of sight, I felt a rush of panic hit me. The whole thing had been so strange and surreal, it barely felt real. I wasn't about to wait around to see what would happen next. I started packing immediately. I've never been someone who tries to tough it out when something feels wrong. I trust my gut. Luckily, my gear was minimal and easy to break down. Within minutes, everything was packed and strapped to my back. I had no idea where those two had gone, but I didn't want to be anywhere nearby if they decided to return. Before leaving, I kicked the unused logs out of the fire ring so the flames would die out shortly after I left. Then I slipped into the trees, heading back the way I'd come in. The hike out was almost 2 hours. For the first 10 minutes, I was tense, constantly checking over my shoulder, listening for movement. But as I got farther from the lake, I started to feel more at ease. Then maybe 40 minutes into the walk, I realized how unnaturally quiet the woods had become. No frogs, no insects, not even wind, just stillness. That's when I heard it, footsteps, fast and heavy, somewhere off to my left. They were human, no doubt about it, and moving quickly through the brush maybe 100 feet away. I couldn't see anything in the dark, so I just kept going, heart racing. A few minutes later, the same sound, this time on the other side of me. It was strange how soft the footsteps sounded, almost too soft for someone running through a forest. That's when it hit me. They were probably barefoot, just like before. And if that was true, then it had to be the same two people I saw earlier. Had they followed me all this way? Were they circling me? The rest of the hike, I kept hearing bursts of running, quick movements in the distance, like someone watching from the dark, then darting off again. That walk through the woods might have been the most terrifying thing I've ever experienced. Somehow, though, I made it. Back to my vehicle and safely out of there. I wish I had answers. Something to explain who those people were or why they were out there, but I don't. Nothing ever came of it. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined the whole thing, or if maybe They weren't even alive. I don't know. And honestly, I'm not sure I want to. I never went back. At the time, I was 24 and living in a small converted van, traveling across the Pacific Northwest. I'm originally from southern Idaho, but by then, I'd been on the road for a while. You meet all kinds of people doing this lifestyle, folks living out of RVs, school buses, vans like mine. Personally, I avoided big cities and preferred smaller towns or quiet backcountry spots between destinations. Most nights I felt safer deep in the woods than I ever did parking in a crowded lot somewhere. Don't get me wrong, it still got eerie now and then. But being alone in nature always felt more secure than trying to blend in under bright lights and security cameras. That particular week, I was slowly making my way between two major cities in western Washington. I like to take it slow, traveling back roads, stopping for a few nights at whatever remote spots I could find. On this day, I turned off onto a narrow dirt road that wound deep into the forest. There were a couple of small clearings along the way, but none looked recently used. No tire tracks, no litter. It felt completely empty. I decided to keep driving a little farther, hoping to find something more open. Eventually, the road ended in a wide, round clearing. No lake, no view, just tall pines all around. But it was spacious, private, and quiet. In the center of the clearing, someone had built a ring of stones for a campfire. It wasn't picturesque, but it felt like a good place to stop for the night. I leveled out the van and pulled into place. It was mid-spring, and in this part of Washington, that meant rain. Almost constant. So there wasn't much reason to be outside. I slid open the side door to let in some fresh air while I prepped dinner on my little propane burner. The sun had started to drop behind the trees, but there were still a couple hours before I'd settle in for the night. Over the next half hour, dusk faded into darkness, and the rain started to come down harder. I closed the side door to keep the interior dry, then cracked one of the small back windows open just a bit. I sat on the bed and pulled up a show on my laptop, trying to unwind. At some point while I was watching, a glare suddenly flashed across my screen, from behind me. A brief reflection, like a beam of light hitting the glass. Before I even had time to fully react, it vanished. Not like it moved off somewhere, more like it was deliberately shut off. I turned and looked out through the cracked window, but there was nothing, just trees and rain. It was dark, and I had no way of knowing how close or far the light source had been, or even what kind of light it was. Since the forest road had a couple pull-offs along the way, I figured maybe another traveler had just arrived. Maybe their headlights had found an opening through the branches and hit my window before they cut the engine. But the thing was, the light hadn't come from the road. That side of the van faced nothing but thick forest. If there was another path through those trees, I didn't know about it. There wasn't much I could do with that, so I turned back around and kept watching my show. Now and then I glanced toward the windows or thought I heard something shifting outside, but the rain tapping steadily on the roof made it hard to tell what was real. Each time I checked, there was nothing there. I tried not to let it get to me. Sometime around 10 or maybe 11, I decided to call it a night. I shut off the lights, closed the windows, and pulled down the shades. The inside of the van was nearly pitch black. I crawled under the blanket and tried to get some rest. Most nights I could fall asleep without much effort, but this time, something just felt off. I couldn't settle. The rain had started coming down harder, and after about an hour, low rumbles of thunder began rolling through the forest. It was loud, too loud to even pretend to sleep through. Roughly 2 hours into the night, somewhere in the middle of the storm, I heard something outside. It wasn't the weather, it was quick, sharp, like someone running past and snapping a branch underfoot. It was brief, but clear, close, right outside the van. The moment it happened, everything else seemed to stop. No other footsteps, no movement, just the pounding rain and distant thunder. I leaned over and looked through the small window, but it was pitch black. I couldn't even see the ground below. The longer I stared out into the darkness, the heavier the unease became. I couldn't explain it, but I felt watched, like someone was standing just out of view, looking straight at me. I let the shade fall back into place. I sat there, completely still, telling myself it was probably nothing. My mind had to be playing tricks. But then, I heard it. A voice. It was male but quiet, like a harsh whisper. It didn't sound like it was directed at me, more like it was meant for someone else, maybe a hushed conversation happening nearby. I didn't move, didn't even lift the blanket. I was terrified they might already know I was in there, and if not, they probably assumed someone was, which somehow made it worse. Were they deciding what to do? For the next couple of minutes, there was nothing but the rain hitting the van and thunder rolling faintly in the background. I was almost convincing myself it had passed when I heard something press against the van's side door. It made a soft, bending sound, like someone's weight shifting against the plastic. Then came a knock, just one. A few seconds later, another knock. I sat frozen. I didn't answer. I didn't breathe. Maybe they weren't sure who was inside, if I was alone or if I wasn't. Maybe they were trying to figure that out, and maybe, just maybe, they were waiting for me to react, so I stayed silent. Saying nothing felt safer than saying the wrong thing. The knocking continued, every few seconds, steady and unnerving. Minutes passed, maybe 5, maybe more. Whoever it was had to be soaked by then, standing out there in the storm, barely able to see through the rain. Then finally a voice spoke up. "Sheriff's Department, open the door." What? I didn't believe it for a second. If they were actually law enforcement, why hadn't they said that from the start? Why knock in silence for minutes first? They kept going, repeating different variations of the same thing, claiming they were deputies, demanding I open the door. It felt less like protocol and more like someone trying to avoid forcing their way in. I slowly lifted the edge of the window cover and peeked out. All I could make out was a dark silhouette shifting near the van. But even in that low light, I could tell. There was no uniform, no visible badge, no gear, just a shadow moving too close. My heart sank. I knew this wasn't right, and it felt like things were about to escalate. The knocking started getting faster, more aggressive, as if they were losing patience. I hesitated for a few seconds, mentally flipping through my options before I made a decision. I was going to drive. I slipped into the front seat and turned the ignition. The engine started, and instantly I heard it. Footsteps. 2 sets, rushing toward the van from somewhere nearby. As I shifted into gear, one of them reached the window next to me. I didn't look, I just pressed the gas. The van jolted forward, tires splashing through the mud. Somehow, I didn't get stuck. I made it to the trail and didn't stop driving. I kept going until I was back on the main road. I didn't see another vehicle on the way out, not parked, not hidden, which only made it clearer, whoever those people were, they hadn't followed me out there in a car. I filed a report with the local sheriff's office later that day. As expected, they confirmed that no officers had been in that area overnight. I never received a follow-up, and nothing ever came of it. Whatever those people wanted, I don't want to imagine. I haven't had anything like that happen again, but I also haven't camped that far off grid since.